Tidal rivers offer a unique challenge to any angler, but approached with the right knowledge, they can offer some of the best bass fishing you can find. Today, Woo Daves explains how to stay ahead of the tide. Also, Rick Clunn will explain the importance of blind spots in bass fishing, and it's not what you think. But up first, Kevin VanDam talks about how making a lot of noise may help you get more bites.
Got him. Got one. Man, he hit it way out there. That's one of the great things about like lipless baits is you can cast them a long ways and cover a lot of water with them. But I mean, they're just not for everything. I have specific situations that I like to throw lipless baits. And for me, it's anytime I've got a lot of flats. You know, if you got a lot of flat water to cover, you're gonna be in good shape. He ate it too. That's the key to these baits, is depth control. Look at the size of that dude right there. Anytime you're fishing any flat water at all, these baits cover so much water, and if you can hit something with it, I want to deflect it off some rocks, some grass, even kicking the bottom, just mud. If it's going through the water column and not hitting anything, you're not going to be getting strikes like that. Let's let him go. I've spent a lot of time toying with trying to find the perfect equipment for fishing these type of baits right here. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that the 7-foot glass rod with a 5-to-1 gear ratio reel and a good assortment of fluorocarbon line. I'm going to have several of these rods rigged with different sizes of line so I can you know, cover all the depth zones out there. A lot of guys like a high-speed reel for fishing these baits. I like the 5-to-1 because as I'm fishing these deeper, which I do an awful lot, I'm going to be able to keep that bait down a little bit better. You want to be real careful of that when you're fishing this bait to make sure that you're contacting the bottom or the cover or the grass, whatever's down there. That is the most critical thing. So pick a setup that you've got good control and good feel with. For me, it's this setup right here. Oh my gosh, there's another good one right there. It is so important to really match your equipment to the scenario that you're in. I mean, I'll have several rods rigged up with the same bait on it with different sizes of line and stuff, just so I can control the depth of that bait. These baits are so good, I have so much fun fishing these big flats with them. Again, it's just, you cover so much water with it. I cannot believe how they eat it. They can't help themselves. They're rattling that bait, but if it's not hitting something, you're not going to be catching them. Oh, look at that guy. There's a lot of different size baits out there. You can use the 1/4 ounce size or the 3/8 or the 1/2 ounce or the 3/4, but I really prefer the 1/2 ounce size. That red-eyed rattler in a 1/2 ounce, I can fish from anything as shallow as 2 foot deep, and if I go that shallow, I'm gonna put it on 20-pound test line. That'll help keep that bait up higher. It'll keep it in the top of the grass or keep it in that shallower water. If I'm fishing this bait and I'm trying to get maximum depth, I'll go down to 8 or 10-pound fluorocarbon. That fluorocarbon will sink and helps that bait get down, so I can still keep contact with the grass or the bottom, even out deep like that. This technique is not a technique where you just cast it out there and wind it back in straight to the boat. A steady retrieve won't get you many bites. You've got to work this bait. You got to make sure that it's coming in contact with the bottom. So if I'm not hitting something, I'm going to stop it and let the bait sink down until I do. But start and stop it, vary with retrieve speed. Don't just cast it out and burn it back in because you're cheating yourself. The erratic movements and getting that bait to deflect off the grass or the bottom, or even just kicking up in the mud down there. That's what triggers strikes.
Time and tide wait for no man, and unless you understand that, fishing can be tough on a body of water affected by tides. Woo Daves takes the mystery out of this technique as we go in depth.
Boy, it's a beautiful day. We're gonna spend it fishing tide water. You're gonna see a lot of structures today. You're gonna learn a lot about tidewater fishing. If you hadn't been on some tidewater, you need to get out there and fish, because as far as I'm concerned, it offers some of the best fishing in the country. Basically, what a tidewater river is, it's a coastal river. It's on your coast anywhere around the country, and it fluctuates anywhere from 3 to 6 feet. And as it goes up and down, what this does, it creates different structures. The lower the water, the less structure you're gonna have in the water. The higher the water, the more structure you're gonna have. The key to fishing tidewater is understanding the tide flow. That's just the bottom line. It's a nice, healthy looking bass. Back to the ocean. I've laid out a typical tidewater map here, scenario for anywhere in the country you go fishing, and I'm gonna try and explain it to you. Because I think if you'll understand this, it'll make you a lot better tidewater fisherman. Basically, you got your river that dumps right into a body of water close to the ocean. And it's gonna run up 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 miles back into the inlands. All right, if you come down to the mouth of the river, and let's say you've got a high tide there at 8 o'clock in the morning. All right, here it's gonna start out at 8 o'clock because it's high. That means like at 8:30, 8:40, it'll be going out here. This will be your first stop. Then maybe at 9:15 or 9:20, it will start out here. At 10 o'clock, it will start out here. 11 o'clock here, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. So you're gaining 5 hours of outgoing water. But anyway, let's say I'm catching fish down here on topwater pattern, say a buzz bait and lily pads. Well, that's only gonna last about an hour. And then the water's gonna drop out. Well, all I gotta do is crank my boat, run up here 8 or 10 miles, and I gain another 30 minutes of fishing. So I can fish on my high water pattern all day for 5 or 6 hours. Low water pattern, same thing. You position yourself to be at the low water spot and just run your tides from that way. There he is, there he is. Hardly hit the bottom. Yeah, look at that tank jump. That's a pretty fish there. Oh, daddy. Woo! That's the name of the game right there now, buddy. When you get 5 of those, you got something. Now, one key thing to remember is, let's say you got a big creek coming off at the mouth of the river, and it's low water here at the mouth. Well, you got to realize it's still high outgoing water way back in this creek. You can see if I stretch this creek out, it would come way up here. So I'm gonna have the same tides in the back of this creek as I've got here. So the tide I've got up here at 3, I've got in the back of this creek. And then you lose your tide, so you run back out, you run up here and come in this creek, and you got the same scenario again. You've gained in the back of this creek, so you got the same fish in here that you had here. And you get another 2 hours to fish it. The thing you want to remember is on a tide, it's 6 hours in, sits for about 45 minutes, 6 hours out, sits 45 minutes. So you're gonna gain about an hour, 15 minutes, somewhere along in there every day. In other words, if I'm fishing right here at this spot at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's high tide, that means tomorrow it's gonna be high here at about 11:15. So instead of coming here to fish, I would go on by here and stop down the river 10 miles and I'd have my high water. Now when you've got a full moon, you're gonna have a lot faster water, lower tides as a rule. If you've got the new moon, your tides are not gonna drop quite as fast and they're gonna run slower. And this can play a key into positioning bass a lot of times and everything too, due to the current. Good fish, good fish. I knew it'd pay off. Coming to daddy. Old crankbait. Come on. Now that makes things a little bit better. We're gaining. He was right in behind that piling where the current was going by, and he just darted right out and grabbed it. That's a nice river bass right there with about 2.5 pounds. All you got to remember is if you're fishing here and it's high and the water drops for 20, 30 minutes, you run up that way 10 minutes, you got another 30 minutes of fishing with the same type of water. And this way, again, you're keeping your baits in prime conditions for the pattern that you're fishing. This right here is a key to opening up the door for a lot better tidewater fishing.
Understanding tide charts is key to productive bass fishing, but today's electronics are making this task easier than ever with several GPS modules that will show you the tide once locked onto your specific position.
You know, you don't need a wide range of lures when you're fishing tidewater. I've tried to narrow it down to my favorite. You know, if I was going to a tournament, I'd probably have my box loaded with this before I started with anything else. One thing I found on tidewater fishing is smaller baits, smaller spinner baits, smaller crankbaits, smaller worm. Everything smaller seems to work better. Typically, I think because most of your bait and everything is smaller. All right, so basically you've got three types of lures here. You got your small crankbaits, your small spinner baits, and your finesse plastics. I've got my Bagley balsa crankbaits here. I've got a Killer Bee 2 and a Killer Bee 1. And that's about the only two size lures that I'm gonna use. One thing I want you to notice here is on my Killer Bee 1s, I've got three different lip sizes: shallow, medium, and deep. That way I can cover different depths of water. These lures I'm gonna use around wood, rock, bridge piles. When you're fishing bridge pilings or old docks and on tidewater, one thing I've learned is, I don't know if you noticed, but I've got two different baits tied on. Basically, I've got a shallow running, about a mid-depth range, and I've got a deep running lure. You can see the size of the lips. This lure will run 2 or 3 foot deeper than this one. So what I'm doing, I'm alternating back and forth to see if the fish are positioned up near the top or down near the bottom. It's probably the big mistake I see a lot of fishermen make. It is throw one depth running lure and they move on, and somebody will come right in behind them and catch fish. Crankbaits in general, when you're fishing current, one thing I really like about them, you can throw it right past it, come by and bounce off stuff. The current will sweep it into a pile. In other words, you've got 4 pilings in a row here and you cast down past them as your bait comes by. It's trying to go that way, so you're bouncing off each piling. And all that's doing is gonna create a reaction strike from a bass that's laying there. I'm always carry a lipless crankbait, and that's gonna work good, especially in the spring. That'll catch you a lot of fish. All right, that's another good little fish. Come on, baby. All right. That right there, that's gonna bring the krill up to about 9.5, 10 pounds today. All these rivers, I've caught fish off of duck blinds, and sometimes, I mean, catch some really big fish off of them. They're prime places to hold fish. They're replenished every year with fresh brush. You know, all we gotta do is sit back and watch TV while they're out brushing up their blinds and everything, and they're making us a nice fishing hole for the next year. This is the XPS popper. You'll fish a lot of topwater, especially early in the morning when you've got outgoing tides. And you just want something that emulates a bait fish, and that little XPS popper is about as good as it comes. Well, as you can see, the wind's really picked up here in the last, really in the last 5 minutes. And depending on which way the wind blows, if it blows against the tide, then you're gonna have a slow outgoing tide. But if it blows with it, it really gets the current to rushing. Those fish will get real, real tight to structure, stay out of that current. There he is. Another good fish there. Another good spinnerbait fish. Nice little fat boy. Spinnerbait, I keep the blades small. The reason, again, Tidewater River, I think you've got a lot more smaller bait fish. Jigs, catch a lot of fish in the fall on jigs in Tidewater rivers. Now we're getting into the plastics, and that's what I'm known for. And if you notice here again, I've kept it small. I got my Zoom finesse worm, U-tail, Zoom ringworm, brush hog, ultraviolet speed crawl, and fluke. Now I want to talk more about this speed crawl. This is just a little bait. It doesn't look like much, but it's what I've won my last 2 BASS events on, and both of them were in tidewater on the Hudson River, and this little lure accumulated about 80% of my catch. Dyed a little pincher chartreuse. These two little pinchers, were, when it goes down, it flutters, and just fishing on about a 1/4 to 5/8 ounce sinker, depending on the thickness of the cover. Again, it's won me over $100,000 in the last 2 tournaments up there. So that's something you definitely want to have when you're fishing tidewater. But these are the baits right here that I'm going to be fishing with if you're in the tournament against me. You know, when you're in the area, just go to your local Bass Pro and ask them, say, what area of the river the fish biting in, you know? And usually you can get a good report. Oh, the lower river's been hot, or the creeks have been hot, or the main river, you know, grass beds on the main river, whatever. Look at your tide chart and say, well, it's gonna be high water at 9 o'clock in the morning. And just go there and put in the fish around, let that tide drop again, and watch these structures, you know, appear as the day goes on and the water gets lower. Remember, study that tide chart, fish the tides, run the tides to your pattern, keep your lure small, make multiple casts to the structure, and I promise you'll have a good day on a tidewater river.
Up next, Rick Clunn talks about how we're all affected by blind spots. He can help you see familiar waters and a way to help you catch more bass. It's this week's Art of Angling.
You know, in our ever-increasing attempt to understand the effects fishing pressure will have on our lakes, I'm going to quote Robert Frost. 2 roads diverge in the woods, and I chose the one less traveled, and it's made all the difference. You know, the best anglers I know have the ability to see water that other anglers don't see, to actually see water that's invisible to other anglers. First, you've got to understand the way we as humans look at things. Even when you drive to work every day, you tend to look, believe it or not, unconsciously at the same things over and over. The same billboard, the same bus stop where there's a pretty girl sitting every morning to catch the bus. And what you don't realize, though, is the things you don't see. And those essentially are what I will refer to as blind spots. Anglers do the same thing when they're on the water. When you're driving your boat down the lake, we're making these intellectual judgments about what a good spot is and what a bad spot is. In other words, we may look at this real pretty point running down the lake and say, good spot. May look at the timber over here and say, a good spot. We look at the nice rocky bank and say, that's a good spot. So we're going good spot, bad spot. We don't say bad spot, but we're doing that. Good spot, bad spot, good spot, bad spot. So what happens is the same thing that the driver that's driving every day from his home to his work. We're seeing certain things and certain things we're not seeing. Our eyes are seeing it, but our brain's not registering it. And that creates voids in what we see on a lake. When I won the Classic again in 1984 at Pine Bluff, Arkansas, still the all-time record for the Bassmaster Classic World Championship. After that tournament was over, a lot of locals come to me and go, we don't know anybody that ever fished that spot. How did you find that spot? My grandfather didn't fish it. My father didn't fish it. I don't fish it. None of my friends fish it. And I fished the river my whole life. This was on the Arkansas River. And it really got me to thinking what these guys were saying to me. How did I find something that nobody else had found? And so when I really started thinking back over it, I looked at this area. It's a big backwater area off the Arkansas River called the Pine Bluff Backwater area. And I started looking at it. It had a lot of really pretty water in it. I mean, trees on one side, lily pads, boat docks and tree falls, creek channels coming in. And the area where I caught the fish met none of those descriptions. In other words, it was the worst looking area if you just visually looked at it of any of the water in there. We're kind of like bees attracted to flowers. Everybody went to these good looking spots, and by the time they were finished with those, they didn't mess with the in-between areas, or what I call the blind spots or the bad spots. The way we navigate our boats contribute to this. In other words, when you leave the dock, you usually go from point A to point B. You may have shortcuts. Well, if you look on your map, that shortcut a lot of times cuts off a big section of the lake. And if you really sit up there in a helicopter all day and you watch all the boat traffic, that part of the lake hardly gets any boat traffic. Thus, it probably gets very little fishing pressure as well. There's just a lot of little things like this you're going to have to start becoming aware of if you want to deal with the ever-increasing amount of boat traffic that we do have on our lakes nowadays.